Hi everyone and welcome. I'm Susan Smith. I am so thrilled that so many of you are here this morning for me. Not sure what time of day it is for you. We're in a corner of my quilting studio and I'm sitting, of course, in front of a quilt. And funny story for you guys because stuff seems to happen all the time. Can you see my mic here? It's got this little white corsage pin holding it on. Don't you know the clip for my mic broke this morning? And there's no time to change that, right? But I thought you would all appreciate it being pinned on there with my quilting pin, right? So welcome, welcome. I am so glad that you are here today. I'm going to take a minute or two to introduce myself, who I am, and why I have something to say to you while a few more people join, and then we're going to dive right into the content. I have lots to share with you today, so it will be a meaty workshop. Again, my name is Susan Smith. I am currently a long arm quilter, but I grew up in pretty primitive style in northern British Columbia, Canada. And my parents and our whole family, I'm one of six, we grew up in a remote area. We didn't have electricity, so I learned to sew on a treadle sewing machine alongside my mom. We made quilts together as far back as I can remember. So did my grandmother, great-grandmother, etc. So a long line of quilts in my family. And of course, I grew up doing it the very traditional way, I guess you would say. We had cardboard pattern templates and we drew around them with a ballpoint pen and cut out with the scissors, sewed on the treadle sewing machine and hand quilting. So that was how I learned to make quilts. And it's only in recent years, we now live in Spokane, Washington, so the eastern side of the western side of the United States. And it's just in the last 10 or 12 years that I've kind of started immersing myself into the industry that is quilting. So getting out to quilt shows, having an opportunity to take classes and meet a lot of other quilters. So that's been really, really rewarding. And I get to meet lots of you when I'm out and about quilting too. So that's really great. I first got into machine quilting early on when we were living in Washington. That's about almost 12 years ago now. And I knew I wanted to make more quilts faster. So the first class I ever took was with a lady named Chris, who was teaching machine quilting on the domestic machine. So I dove into that. Like, I could really see the possibilities there, and I dove into that, did quite a few quilts that way. And then I have a dear friend, Mary, who has a very small, just a very entry-level, early long arm quilting machine, and she invited me over one day to quilt at her house. And I knew that afternoon that this was for me. So it's all Mary's fault. And I've been quilting on the long arm ever since. I've quilted over 1,000 quilts. Freehand, I do have digital capabilities on my machine, so I do maybe 1 in 20 or 30 quilts, maybe, are done with that robotic system, but mostly I quilt freehand. That is my love. I also have a podcast, Measure Twice, Cut Once. I'm a YouTuber. That's where you're seeing me now. So kind of the thread that is running through these things is I really enjoy sharing what I know with other quilters. I enjoy learning from quilters who know more than I do, have a broader experience than I do, and I love to share that as well. So that's kind of what's coming your way today. Feel free to be typing into the comments. I know you already are, many of you, where you're tuning in from. It's so lovely to me to see where in the world folks are watching from. So my husband Dave, who we lovingly dub Mr. Producer, is sitting beside me, and he's going to throw some comments onto the screen of those of you that are tuning in. Let's see who all is here.
Oh gosh.
There's many, many. I won't catch you all, but let's get a few. Jean in Georgia. S. Verse, love your programs. Found you about 3 weeks ago. C. Just got back from a sunny walk in Calgary, Alberta. Wondering if I'll be at the Portland, Oregon show this weekend. Sorry, I will not. Kim, trying to tune in while the kids are napping. Okay, I'll be quiet. Lana, is that quilt behind you quilted at 1/4 or 1/2 inch apart? It's awesome. You're very close. It's about 3/8 of an inch. Tammy, beautiful day in Edmonton, Kentucky. Jean, gee, Susan, I still love piecing quilts on my old treadle machine. I still do too. Dognut Mom, Northeast Ohio, but originally from Toronto, Canada. I was born in that area. Wendy in Washington State. Marlene in Nova Scotia, Canada. Lynetta from North Idaho. Jacqueline wondering, how is Stella? Stella is the name of my long arm. Clearly, Jacqueline, you were maybe on my live streaming episode yesterday. Stella's doing fine. PWA from outside Atlanta. Kathy, I have that quilt pattern showing behind Susan. It's a great one. I've made it a couple times. Erin in Northeast Ohio. Cindy, one of the favorite quilts is the one I'm in front of. Good choice on my part, right?
I named that town.
Marilyn, okay, who named your town? Seriously. Whose idea was that? Madge, Shelby Bailey. I'm in Hanover, New Hampshire, looking out over the Connecticut River. Linda or Peter, good morning from Vancouver, Canada. Let's see. Mr. Producer is rushing. Lisa in Fort Myers, Florida. Judy, so glad you get to see this. S. DZ in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Georgia. Stitchscape, the Sewing Corner in the UK as well. Catherine Q, was there a workbook? Yes, there is a workbook. Look if you got the email this morning, the 15-minute notice email or the couple hours email, and Mr. Producer, when he's done throwing questions on the screen, will put it in the chat as well. Yes, is that doable?
No, it's not this morning.
He's saying that's not doable. So
I'll try it from here. I'll try it on my iPad.
Okay, he's going to try and link it up in the comments. Otherwise, best thing is to go back to the emails. I sent it out in a couple of the emails. Ruth in Palmer, Alaska, fantastic. Linda in Colorado, Sewing Corner in UK. Mary Kay from Horseshoe Bay, Texas. Wonderful.
Oh, sorry. Here.
We probably should scoot along. Cindy's asking, did any of you have a problem opening the free gifts of 3 in 10 helpful hints? Cindy, you might want to email me separately and I can help you out with that, okay? And send them to you directly. Someone from Australia. Orange, New South Wales, Australia, 3 a.m. here. Oh my goodness, you're dedicated. Thank you for showing up. Cassandra, woohoo, made it. So good. Shelby is in Manchester, Londonderry by the airport. Awesome. This is so great to see so many of you joining in from around the world, and I appreciate those of you who are giving up sleep for this. My goodness sakes. Okay, a couple housekeeping things. You are welcome to put questions into the chat. I'm going to have a time dedicated to questions and answers kind of in the middle and again at the end. If you would though, if you would please put a capital Q in front of your question, that enables us to run a search for all the questions because as you can imagine, the comments are just buzzing by and it would be all too easy to miss them, and I don't want to miss them if I can possibly help it. All right, whew, my iPad has gone to sleep. I've been so busy talking with all my notes here. All right, you may have guessed by now by the rapid speech. Freehand quilting is indeed my passion. I especially do love coaching others to find the same joy and fulfillment in it that I find and not to be intimidated by it, or worst, to think that they in fact can't do it. So that's what this workshop is all about. It's kind of intended to be a sampling. It's a smattering of ideas and of topics, tons and tons of ideas and photographs that I hope will inspire you and encourage you and show you what's possible. I also hope that it will be a springboard to you to help get your own creative juices flowing and sort of open your eyes to what is possible. And in the interest of full disclosure too, near the end of the workshop, I will be presenting to you some information about a masterclass that I offer online. So those details, sorry about that. That's Mr. Producer. We blame him entirely. He's playing around here on the screens and going places we're not quite ready to go yet, but we'll get back to that.
I'll go back. Sorry.
All right, have your workbook handy if you can find it, and we're going to try and get a link in. Are we having any success doing that?
No, because it's too long of a link for YouTube. It won't allow me to put the long link in, but it's in 9 of their emails.
Okay. I'm going to encourage you, go back and look in some of the emails. It is in several of them. We can only put so long of a link, apparently, into the YouTube chat window, and it's too long. It's not letting us link up to it. So I'm really sorry about that. I'll try and make a note for next time to make a short link for it. But if you do have the workbook handy or even a piece of note paper, have that handy. So there's plenty of room in that workbook for you to jot down ideas, for you to jot down aha moments, for you to even sketch out some ideas that maybe come to you from some of the photographs that I'm going to show you. I don't know, does anyone else have wonderful ideas in the middle of the night and then you wake up in the morning and they're completely gone? You know you had a good idea, but you can't for the life of you think of what it was? Just me? I don't know, it happens. But so the workbooks are handy so that you can refer back to those ideas later. Okay, many thanks, by the way, to my husband Dave, whom lots of you who follow my YouTube channel already know him. It would be very difficult to do workshops like this without him doing kind of the back end work for me, so I sure do appreciate that. But let's get started. The name of our workshop today is Freehand Quilting Demystified, 5 myths that tie freehand quilters in knots and how to break free of them. So here's Freehand Quilting Demystified. I always feel like I have a lisp when I say that, but it's just kind of a play on words because I want you to remember that these things that we're going to talk about today are not truths. They are, in fact, myths. So today I want to show you how you can move from paralysis into confidence in your freehand quilting. Like, can you imagine being able to just load up a quilt and start quilting? Be able to have a process for making decisions about what to quilt, know how to load that thing up, not have any repeats to plan or any lining up to do, but just be able to start quilting. That's the kind of things that we're going to talk about today. So I do ask that if you can, lower the distractions. You can tell already I'm a fast talker. I'm going to be packing in the photographs and ideas today. So, you know, close the extra tabs on your computer, maybe even close the door of the room that you're in to try and keep the distractions as low as you can. So we'll get through this as quickly as we can. Okay, I would like to know just a smidge more about you all. Let me know which of these describes you. There's going to be 3 descriptions. Number 1, you're here because you're a novice. You've maybe recently purchased a long arm or recently started quilting freehand at your domestic machine and you're just afraid of wrecking your quilt. You're terrified. Where do I start? I don't want to ruin this thing that I've put all the effort into piecing. Or maybe you've had it for a long time and it's been giving you the side eye, but you still feel like a beginner. Or are you number 2? You're here because you have some experience, you've done a fair bit of quilting perhaps, but you've always relied on, say, paper pantographs to point the way for you. Or are you number 3? Are you an old hand at quilting, but not freehand quilting? So maybe you're very experienced, maybe you've always though used computerized or digital designs and you want to grab hold of that elusive free motion quilting. Whether you're 1, 2, or 3, let me know. It's really fun to kind of get a feel for who is joining in and for each of you to see that there are others in the same place in their journey that you are too. So let's see who's typing in here. We're getting a number of 1s. This is great. I'm seeing comments about borders. We'll try and come back to some of those in the Q&As. Cheryl, I'm number 1 with the new long arm. Crystal, I'm a novice. Helia Attack, number 1. Shafali, I'm a novice. Kimberly, number 1. Dognut Mom is a novice. Long arm just arrived a few days ago. Oh, you've got some fun ahead of you. G. Reed, novice with the new long arm. Denise, a number 2. Karen, a novice. Madge is a novice. Relatively fearless. Fearless is good. Fearless is really good. Roswitha, pure beginner. Beverly, number 1. Carolyn Terrier, number 1. Lisa, number 1. Okay, have we got any but 1s and 2s in here? Mostly 1s. Marie, Anna, another Susan, number 1 novice. Catherine Ross, a 2. Kathy, pantograph person but love FMQ, free motion quilting. Adele, number 1 for sure. Carrie, number 1. Jean, number 2. Lori, number 1. Woo, look at them all go by.
Holy cow, we got a lot.
So I'm not, oh, there's a number 3, Charity number 3. I'm so happy you're here. I was beginning to think, Deb, another number 3, Kathy. Oh, great. Now you're starting to chime in. This is great. So we're seeing all the numbers. No matter which one you are, I hope that I have something here that will light you up. You can see how enthusiastic I am about, gosh. You can see how excited I am about freehand quilting. So I hope that I can impart some of that enthusiasm to you today and just spark some fresh ideas and some open up your horizons to what's possible for you. All right, we're gonna move on. I've got a great photograph for you. This, as I wrote on it, is my very first project on Lucy. My first long arm was named Lucy. I have to name things, it's just a compulsion. But this was February 26, 2015, the very first thing I quilted. Here's another photograph showing a little more detail of the quilting on that first project. And you can see, you know, not very graceful, a little bit wobbly, a little bit like a first grader, right? But of course, that is in fact where we all start. Excuse me. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this process and where you're going to go and how this can become doable for each one of you. And this relates so much to my journey. I'm showing you where I began because I've been through these same steps. I've been through those same feelings of a little bit of terror looking at the quilt, certainly uncertainty, like what do I do next? How do I approach these decisions? So that's what we're gonna button down today. Myth number one that I certainly believed and that I know so many quilters believe is I can't draw. So letting you in on a little secret. I can't draw my way out of a wet paper sack. I've never been a sketcher or a painter or a sculptor or considered myself an artist in any way. But when I found the medium of needle and thread, something about that spoke to me. And what I've learned is that freehand quilting is not just about forming the actual shape of the design. So it's not just about being able to sketch a cowboy boot or a flower or scenery, whatever the case may be. A whole lot of it is about balance and proportion and about scale. It's about peripheral vision and seeing where you're going next and planning ahead. And turns out I have those skills. So bringing that to bear on my freehand quilting, that enabled me to learn the other skills of drawing. And we'll talk lots more about that today, reasons why you don't need to be an artist to be a good freehand quilter. But here's some of the starting points. I encourage you to be on the lookout for things that could be quilting ideas. I encourage you to learn how to adapt the things that you see to a continuous line of quilting. Let me show you what I mean. Here's an example of a quilt that I did a few years back, and I don't have a way of circling the picture. I wish I could, but in the very center, closest to you, is this olive greeny kind of flower. Take a good look at that. It's very whimsical. It's got kind of a scribbled little center, and then the petals are very irregularly shaped around it. Okay, got that flower in your mind? Let's look at the next picture. There you see that I've quilted out that same flower. So in this quilt, I did not have to draw a flower. I just literally looked at the fabric and thought, I can easily convert that scribbled flower into this quilting, and I quilted out that exact same design. So the reality is you don't have to start from a blank slate. You don't have to come up with the idea from the bottom up. There's a million places you can get ideas. Let me show you some. This is one of my favorites, hotel carpets. Hotel carpets are, I don't know why, they seem to have so much movement in them and so much flowing lines in them, but this picture here is a hotel carpet, and I took one look at that and thought, that would make a great quilting texture, wouldn't it? Those kind of irregular waves. Here it is quilted out. See what I'm saying? There was just that exact translation from what I saw on a hotel carpet to what I could do at my quilting machine. Here's another idea, again a hotel carpet. This one I haven't quilted yet, but one of these days I will. But it fascinated me to see these little circles and also the curlicues that were tucked in with it too. It's just a unique picture. And here's just one more. This one has circles and kind of paisleys tucked in, and I've never seen that combination. And I thought, that would make a really interesting quilting design. So these are the places my mind goes when I see wallpaper, when I see upholstery fabric, whatever the case may be. How can I convert that into a quilting design? So it means that I don't have to come up with the original idea. Someone else has already had an original idea, but I can springboard from that into something that I can quilt.
I don't see my pictures up there.
Alrighty, myth number 2, I can't decide what to quilt. This afflicts all of us from time to time, and honestly, I still run across this from time to time. But over the years, I've learned that I can ask myself questions that can narrow down my choices. But to begin with, I encourage you, banish the FOMO. FOMO is fear of missing out, fear of getting it wrong. There is no one single right quilting design for your quilt. There's just the one that you choose. But here are some of the questions that I ask myself that help me narrow down the choices to a manageable amount. So the first question that I ask myself is, what is the quilt going to be used for, or who is it for? So is it going to be used to hang on a wall as a gorgeous wall hanging, or is it going to be used as a couch quilt? Is it for a toddler and it's going to get vomited on from time to time, or a college grad who's going to haul it from pillar to post over the next few years? Or is it for a young couple who's getting married? Or is it for a 50th anniversary celebration? So right off the bat, you can see when I think about those different people, recipients, that can help me narrow down. I will quilt something very different on a quilt for a toddler that's going to get washed every week than what I would quilt on something, maybe a table runner that I'm going to set on my table that I want to look beautiful under my flowers. So that can help me start to narrow down my choices. Here's a few examples. This quilt was for one of my nephews when he was younger. And the scale of these flames, just to give you an idea of their size, each individual flame was about 6 inches, so it's pretty big quilting. Well, he's a car aficionado, a speed aficionado now. He's an adult. And you can see the little Alexander McQueen fabric in the middle there, so that's, or on the bottom, that's kind of what was my springboard for an idea and got me thinking flames. But what makes this design so appropriate too is this is a flannel quilt. So it's a bit bulky, it's quite fluffy and cuddly. So having the flames that large, the 6-inch flame, keeps that soft, cuddly look. It's not too fussy. It can absolutely stand up to whatever this kid is going to throw at it, right? So for all those reasons, this was an appropriate design. The age, the use of the quilt, his likes. So that's what guided me toward that design. So here's another example. This was a client quilt. I can't now recall if she was doing it for son, husband, brother, I'm not sure, but a gentleman in her life at any rate. And as you can see, it's kind of a masculine, sort of outdoorsy quilt. There might be girls that like this too, but it's that outdoorsy theme, right? The wildlife. So on the fox itself, I did some custom quilting, you know, kind of texture of fur, texture of tree, etc. But around the outside, all the pieced blocks, I used this kind of a meander, but it looks sort of like a topographical map, because that to me carried on the story this quilt is telling. I'm outdoors, landscape, terrains, mountains, all that. So that guided me. Clearly, I was not going to quilt flowers on this quilt. I could have perhaps quilted loops or waves, but does that really tell the same story as the topographical meandering does? So that's what I chose. All right, let's talk about some more questions we can ask ourselves. Is there some hints in the fabric style or the motifs that would guide you toward a quilting design? So here's a great example of a fabric that has both floral and paisleys in it. So again, this was a client quilt, so I could have gone floral and I could have gone paisley. And again, no one right design, right? Either one of those would have been fine. Any number of florals would have been fine. But it so happened that this client likes paisleys, so we gravitated toward paisley. But that was directly informed by the fabric. That's what guided us toward a very suitable design and narrowed down those decisions and took away our frozen what thing to quilt type of decision. So here's another example. This is 2 quilts, clearly in the picture. Both client quilts again. The one on the left is kind of a sampler of envelopes, and each one is a different fabric. The outer solid and the inner liner. I love this quilt. This particular lady has done a few of them. Super cute. And the one on the right is done with selvages. And those selvages, of course, have printed titles on them, so they look to me like stacked books. So for both of these quilts, I wasn't doing them at the same time. I just brought the pictures together for you. But both of these quilts kind of said to me, you know, the written word, lined paper. And that's what made me think straight line quilting. So the one on the left, I did irregularly spaced lines. The one on the right, they're evenly spaced lines. Either way was fine. But I wanted to point out something here as well. The one on the right has quite a lot of the negative white space and open space. So it might have been to your taste, or whoever quilt it's going to be for, it might have been to that taste to have something unexpected or large, like maybe a floral element or maybe a big star or maybe a geometric shape that would really show up in that white area. That too would have been a correct design choice. There's no one right choice, but this is how thinking through who it's for and what their likes or dislikes are can really help you decide what direction to go with your quilting. Mr. Producer's giving me a reminder here. Please be typing Q before your questions so that we're able to find them. They're really coming in thick and fast, and we want to be able to find them later when we come to answer them, okay? So type a Q in front of them if you could, please. Meantime, we're still asking ourselves questions that help us decide what to quilt on different projects. So Mr. Producer, bless his heart, is running my slides for me, and he's going too fast. Anyway, the question we're asking ourselves here is, are there some indicators in the piecing that would guide us toward a particular type of quilting? So here's a couple of examples. This quilt belongs to my good friend Pris. She makes a lot of quilts for NICU babies. This was one of them. So a couple of things here. First off, we have whales and frogs and water and so forth. And so that, you know, doing something wavy was kind of a no-brainer. But from there, What you can see in the picture on the right is we have this added detail of the little prairie points, which are three-dimensional. They lift up from the fabric. So I wanted to choose a quilting design that was irregular enough that I could lift up those points and quilt under them and then keep on quilting, so that I didn't have this unquilted area behind them. Does that make sense? So I wanted something that I could kind of manipulate where I was going with that quilting and would lend itself to letting those prairie points still be three-dimensional and shine. So we did these really irregular waves that cross over each other. There's no rhyme or reason to them really at all, but they do look watery and they do suit the quilt. And as an added level of detail, Pris, the quilt maker's idea was, why don't we incorporate several colors of waves just to add more interest, because there's a lot of solid color background. So we did 3 different colors of aqua, teal, blue, and then a kind of celery green. So 3 blues plus a green, 4 colors in total. So the waves are just this kind of mix up of those colors, and it really adds dimension and interest to it. But if you had said to me, if you'd handed me this quilt and said, just quilt something on this, I would not have immediately gone toward this design, right? It was this thought process of, well, what's on the quilt? Whales, frogs, water. Okay, waves. Well, I need to have something that I can lift up those points and quilt behind them. Okay, very irregular, very asymmetrical waves. And then how can we add a little more interest, because there's kind of a boring background? We can change up the threads. So this was a process of thoughts, but we didn't have to start with a blank piece of paper or a blank quilt. Thinking through it, talking through who it was for and what it was for helped us to work that out. Here's a couple more examples of the way piecing might indicate what you're going to quilt. Again, I've got a larger area of the quilt on the left and a, oh, I've skipped forward. Sorry, you guys, hang on. No, we'll talk about this one first. We've messed up the order of the slide. Okay, let's do this one then.
So they're at the top. I think I'm missing that next one.
Okay.
I'll find out.
We'll get it together here. This is, by the way, I'm sure you've gathered by now, I'm actually presenting this live, so we do have stumbles like this when we're presenting live, and especially when there's 2 of us trying to coordinate our motions. Nevertheless, I promise you we won't run short of examples. Okay, so let me just get my paper going ahead here too. Okay, this example, this piecing design is called Delectable Mountains, and what I want to show to you in the picture on the right, it's easiest to see. Every 2 color block is a rectangle, a block. And I was able to quilt this design freehand by simply chalking in an S-curve from corner to corner of each of those blocks. That was all the marking that I did, and each block was about 8 inches by 6. Seeing that piecing, that size, that scale, and wanting quilting design that had movement in it, that thought process is what drew me to quilting this design on this quilt. I would not quilt this design across something that had, you know, maybe Ohio stars for piecing, that didn't lend itself to having those piecing lines, those guidelines, that almost pre-marking done for me. And by the way, if you want to hear more about this quilt or see this getting quilted out, it is on my YouTube channel. I live streamed the whole process and it's called Cascades. So you can watch this and you can see how I marked it and see that at work. But basically the piecing offered a grid for me to do my quilting. So here's another example of that. This was a baby quilt. And again, I've showed the whole quilt on the left, a little bit closer up on the right. So in the whole quilt, you can see it's all made with 4-inch blocks, and every other block has a little bow tie in it. So that lent itself, A, to doing something within the squares, and further to using those bow ties as center points in those squares. And that gave me the idea of doing this orange peel type design, just quilting from point to point to point to point with those arcs, because I didn't need to do marking or very little marking at all. I want to point out too though, if your taste lended toward keeping it more linear, if you don't love having the curves against the bow ties, maybe you would have quilted a crosshatch on this and kept all your lines straight. So again, note that there's not one right design. There's possibilities with every quilt, but I took the possibility of having all this grid work done for me of the seam lines to take an opportunity to quilt on all these arcs from point to point. Okay, let's ask ourselves a couple more questions. Remedial quilting, big words for a simple question, which is Is there a challenge in this quilt that I can or should address with my quilting? And here's an example of that. You're seeing the larger quilt on the left, a close-up on the right. So what you can see in the close-up on the right is this kind of awkward Y seam. So this whole quilt was made of hexagons, and it was a large quilt. So bless the lady's heart who pieced it. She did dozens and dozens and dozens of Y seams to assemble this quilt. The thing about Y seams is it's not very easy to figure out what to do with those seam allowances when you're pressing, so they often tend to fold kind of this way and that. And when you're quilting, the ideal is to quilt those down so that they lay nice and flat. So I purposely chose a quilting design that was fairly small in scale. So these fans as a whole are about 3.5 inches, and there's, a number of arcs within each one. And also I had the ability to fudge my quilting a little bit so that I could quilt down those 3-way seam allowance intersections nice and firmly. So you can see in the close-up on the right, I caused my stitching to go right over that seam allowance intersection, and then you can see in the big quilt picture on the left that the thing as a whole now lays nice and flat. If I had not quilted down those seam allowances, they would tend to be catching the light, right? And therefore catching your eye in the finished quilt. So I chose my quilting to do that fixing or that addressing that I needed to do of those awkward seam allowances. Let's look at another example of remedial quilting. This was a fun one. I love quilting vintage projects. And this was a vintage double wedding ring. You can see in the photograph on the left, the cream colored areas, and particularly the 4-sided ones, had so much extra fabric and bulk in them. So with the owner of the quilt, we talked about, double wedding rings can look very, very spectacular when they have custom quilting on them. But I saw a nightmare if I tried to quilt those cream colored areas, if I tried to lay a ruler over them and say crosshatch in those areas, that fabric would be wanting to pleat and bunch, and it would just be a headache. So we talked about that. And instead we chose to do this all over feather across the quilt. And that feather, anything curvy like that, takes up excess fabric as you quilt. So it was the perfect solution for this quilt, for being able to avoid pleats and have it magically look like it was all even and flat. Again, if you want to see this one, I also did it on my YouTube channel. It was a 2-part because it took quite a while, and it's called Vintage Gems. So in that, if you want more details on how I managed that bulk and how I got it to take up in the quilting without offering any pleats, that detail is all there. But here you're just seeing the pictures that illustrate the choice of quilting was really key here. And it was because I saw that challenge that I chose that quilting, the curvy, smaller quilting that would pull in all that excess for me. All right, myth number 3, and after myth number 3, we're gonna take a quick break for some Q&As and for me to take a sip of beverage because I'm getting really dry here. But myth number 3, and I hear this quite often, is if I'm only going to quilt freehand, it limits my options because I only know a few designs. And often I hear, I only know how to meander, or I only know how to do loops. So then, I'm fresh out of designs if I want to do a fancier quilt or one for a wedding gift or something like that. How boring. It limits me. I don't think that's really true, quite honestly. I think that there are things you can do that really dress it up. You can change up the designs, you can dress up the designs, and of course, I'm going to show you some examples. So here's one little quilt. Again, you're seeing whole quilt on the left, close-up of the quilting on the right. So basically, this quilt is loop-de-loops all over it. Most of us can quilt those, whether we're at a domestic machine moving fabric or at a long arm driving over the fabric. Most of us can quilt loop-de-loops. All I did was take a little bit of inspiration from the quilt, which has these 2 golden stars appliqued in the upper left and lower right corner, and think, I'll drop in some stars among my loops. And that's what I did. And that simple little dress up just added that little element that makes this quilting perfectly suit this quilt. And it was a child's quilt, so a little bit playful. The stars certainly don't have to be perfect. Easy peasy. It was a great solution. Here's another example of changing. This, I'm going to go back and forth here between two pictures. This is the same general quilting design. I call it hibiscus. What you're seeing now with the yellow triangles was a very early rendition of it for me. And you can see it's kind of got the spiral in the center of the flower of the hibiscus, and then it's got these longish petals, kind of molar-shaped petals, I call them. Okay, now let's go forward, and I think we've got these possibly out of order. Is this the next one? Yeah, we do. Go to the next one if you would. Okay. This is a later development of this same design. Can you see how I really shortened up those petals? That's one of the changes that I made. The difference is I was seeing with the longer petals that it was difficult to fit them in around each other and move around the quilt top. So I thought, what can I change to make this more easy to quilt? And my answer was shorten up those petals, and then they're easier to fit in and around each other. Secondly, I didn't love the almost raw and unfinished look of the petals, so my answer was to quilt an echo around them, and you're seeing that in this version as well. And it kind of separates the flowers from each other and makes them look a little more polished and finished. So I give you that illustration just to show you that your first idea might not be perfect, but can you change it? Can you dress it up to A, give you more quilting designs in your repertoire, and B, to make it easier or more pleasing to do. So now let's back up, Mr. Producer, to the one that was in the middle there, because it's a great illustration too. So this one is another example of dropping something in to change it up. So again, I've quilted loop-de-loops. You can see that on the left. This time I've kind of changed the scale of them just a little bit, so it's the same quilting motions as that loops and stars had, but I've made the loops a little smaller, a little longer space in between them, so it looks a little more like pumpkin vine tendrils. Can you see how just that little change changed the look of it, made it perfectly suited to this quilt, which was very autumnal? And then I dropped in little things, dropped in a pumpkin. In the picture on the left, you can see there's a couple leaves that are different styles that I dropped in as well. So that's a great way to make it more interesting, make it more personal to the quilt that you're working on. I think it was Angela Walters some years ago that said, I would rather learn 9 variations of one design than learn 9 different designs. And this quilt really emphasizes that point. You could just know how to quilt loops and then practice finding things that you could drop in, and you could have a pretty good repertoire of quilting ideas. So you can see my fall, the pumpkins and leaves, but maybe summertime you've got daisies, or maybe Valentine's or babies you've got hearts, or maybe, you know, stars and stripes you've got cowboy boots and stars, whatever the case may be, but you get the drift. You can start with a fairly simple design, and you can change the scale of it, you can add details to it, and you've got yourself a broad range of quilting designs. I'm going to give you one more example of changing something up. This is my all over feather design, and by the way, I do have a free class for this one if you want to explore it further. You've seen it in a few of these photos. It's a favorite for me. Who doesn't love feathers? But this is kind of my original or typical all over feather, and you can just take a good look at the spacing of the feathers and the plumes. I don't actually quilt the spine of the feather, it's just suggested by the movements of those plumes. And then we're going to take a look at a follow-up picture number 2. A client came to me and said, I want the all over feather design, but I'd like more space in between it. I'd like it to be looser and less dense. So think about for a second, if you're working with a paper pantograph or with a digital pattern, what would your options be? Basically to make it bigger, but if you want more spaces between the feathers, the whole thing is going to get bigger. Where working on a freehand, I was able to just space things out. So each feather plume is still the same size. I could just space it out and get that much more casual, whimsical look. So just that little change gave me another design. And here's one more example, and then we're going to take a break for some questions and answers and for a drink for Susan. This quilt also was for a client, and the rosy part that you're seeing in the center was actually a giant heart. I couldn't get the whole thing into the picture and still have it close enough for you to see the detail. So I quilted an edge-to-edge kind of whimsical rose design across the whole quilt, but she wanted it to have something special in addition. So what we chose to do was this sort of wild rose posy that you're seeing in the lower left-hand corner, and we also did a smaller one in the top right-hand corner to kind of balance it out. So that rose is about 9 inches. So it's a big scale so that it shows up. And because it's kind of got those puffy unquilted areas of the petal, it's a contrast, right, to the texture of the all over design. So adding that contrast and adding that element that plays up the roses, plays up the rosy color, just seemed like the perfect fit for this quilt. I hope this is giving you some ideas for ways that you can just have a jumping off point for freehand edge-to-edge quilting, but kind of make it special. And I just realized maybe some of you here are really new quilters and I'm batting around these terms freehand and all over and edge to edge, and maybe you don't know what those terms even mean. So let me take a second to just define them. All over or edge to edge quilting is when you quilt the same design over an entire quilt. You don't stop for borders, you don't stop for seams or for blocks. It's the whole design all over or edge to edge on the quilt. And the one you're seeing with the rosy posy in the middle is just a small variation on that. Conversely, custom quilting is when you have specific quilting within blocks or within shapes or within borders. That's called custom and often involves stopping and starting. So what I'm talking about here today and what my first love is the idea of quilting edge to edge across a whole quilt and showing how beautiful that can be. Okay, guys, let's take a minute for a few questions and for Susan to have a sip of water.
Okay.
I saw that the Sewing Corner is wondering if I managed to get to the grocery store for coffee. Yes, I did. Susan Lee, can we come back and watch again? I will be sending out an email later today with a link for the replay. Yes, it will be exactly this, but you can watch it over again.
The same link.
Melanie, I have a hard time with borders, but I do the same or different. Okay, not sure if I follow that. Yeah.
Border on a quilt. Do you do it?
Oh, do I do the same or different? Oh, I'm so sorry, Melanie. I didn't read that correctly. That's entirely up to you. You can certainly quilt an all-over type design within the central area of a quilt and then quilt something separate in the borders, or you can conclude that you like the same design over the whole thing. Neither one is wrong or right. It just has to do with the look that you want to achieve and the time that you want to spend on it. Terry, I've been told that the quilt will talk to me. So far, dead silence from all of the tops. I love that. But Terry, truly, I hope that I've helped you to give you some listening points, right? And I'll give you a tip. I will often, when I've got a quilt loaded on my long arm, I will have the next one kind of draped over my ironing board across the room so that I'm just looking up at it from time to time and thinking through, who is this for? You know, what is the theme going on here? Is this a casual, comfy quilt? Is this a more formal quilt? And it does kind of help to listen a little bit to what that quilt might be saying. Marianne, how to save the quilt after I've started stitching a design and realize I don't like it, don't want to do it all over the entire quilt. Oh boy, there's a few answers to that, Marianne, but I gotta say, unless it's a super precious quilt to you, I don't think that I would undo it and redo it. I would either try adding something else into the mix or just finish it up and it'll be a finished quilt and someone will love it. It's equally warm even if it's not perfect. Certainly I look at quilts that I did 5 years ago and think, I'd have made a different decision on that one. But that doesn't mean that it was wrong. It might mean that I've learned something about the decision-making process or about what I like or what I don't like. I really encourage you not to put the time into undoing it. That's my opinion. Kathy, when you do straight line, do you use channel lock or rulers? I use a channel lock. It would be very time consuming to do it with a ruler. We Quilt Studio, not sure what words to put in the PDF spaces.
In the workbook.
I don't have the workbook right in front of me at this moment, so I'm sorry, I'm not very much help to you. I might have to publish a photo of the finished workbook, but I don't have it in front of me at this moment. I'm sorry. But there's no quiz. There's no, we're not giving a grade for it. So, you know, put any answer that strikes you in there. Teresa, how do you quilt a crosshatch on a long arm? Teresa, there are a couple of YouTube episodes. I've done a few small quilts that way. Crosshatch I do typically do with a ruler, and I usually choose a quilt that has piecing where I don't have to mark it. So it's in some sort of grid and I can just follow my ruler from point to point to point across that grid. But there are a couple YouTube episodes that show my process for that. I recommend those. We Quilt Studio. How do you quilt real animal faces on a panel? Now see, here's a question. If you're artistic and want to do that, you go for it. I tend not to. So if there's outlines in the print for the eyes or nose, for example, you might be able to follow those. Otherwise, perhaps a texture, like a fur texture over the whole thing is the answer. I'm not a sketcher. I'm not really a doodler. So for me, I tend to go the simple way. Either follow what's on the panel, if it's got lines, or just quilt a texture over the whole thing. Terry, I've been told if piecing is straight, use a curvy quilt design, and if piecing is curvy, use a straight quilt design. Is this your technique, or should I forget it? I often tend that way, Terry, because I do think that contrast is interesting to the eye. That does not mean it's a rule by any means. So the hexagon flower quilt behind me is one example. It's all straight lines in the piecing, and yet I quilted straight lines. I just thought the straight line, parallel line quilting played up those flowers and didn't detract from them at all, as having something, you know, floral curvy might have detracted from it. So that's really a matter of your taste, very much so. Shannon, sometimes I have to walk away, stop overthinking, and let ideas settle in my head. Also, I find I wake up in the middle of the night and a design pops into my head. I hope you write it down so that you remember what it was in the morning. But that's a great point. Sometimes you do need to just walk away and take a little break. Savannah, it looks like the reason it works is because of the scale and spacing. Is there a good way to get better with scale and spacing? Practice, practice, practice. You know, it does come with practice and experience for sure. I also use a plexiglass audition sheet, which I can lay on top of my quilt and draw on it with a dry erase marker. That helps me visualize the spacing a little bit, or the size of the flower, for example, that I'm quilting on it. So that can be helpful too.
Yeah. Okay.
Susie, where do we find the free feather class? On most of my YouTube episodes, if you go into the show notes, there's a link there right to it. So hopefully that will help you.
So hold on a second. We do have more questions.
Okay, apparently there are more questions. Mr. Producer's hunting. Did you quilt the big flower a couple of times to make it stand out on the quilt? That's a great question, Terry. I actually did, and it did not show up well in the picture. I did the flower in a rose-colored thread and the leaves in a green-colored thread, and I went over them multiple times, and it was not very precise. It was a bit of a, I guess, a whimsical, kind of a scribbly look a little bit, and I think I went over it all 4 times. Because one layer of thread, the scale of it, because the flower was so big, the stitching looked insubstantial. So then I just went over it again and again and again until I thought it looked the right weight, if you will, against the rest of the quilt. And yes, I did do that. Karen, did you draw in the large posy in the corner? I did. So I drew it first on a piece of like parchment paper from my kitchen that was semi-transparent to get an idea of the size that I wanted. And then yes, I used a dry erase marker, as I recall, and sketched the outline of it on the quilt. Lisa, do you have classes for all over designs like your whimsical roses and others? Yes, I do, and I will be talking about that in a few minutes. Okay, how are we doing for questions? I think we probably soon have to get on because we've got more material yet. Okay, a few more questions. Joan, how can I get the workbook? So, did you put the link in, Dave?
It's in the comments.
Okay.
If you scroll up the comments.
Mr. Producer did put it in the comments. Try scrolling through them. It was fairly early on, and he'll try and do it again as well. So be watching, and that's going to pop up in the comments again. Kim, what do you find would be easiest designs for starting out on a domestic machine? Oh boy, I do think a loop-de-loop design is a pretty easy one. And an easy way to build your repertoire, because it's a fairly easy one to add little things into: flower, star, heart, leaf, those sorts of things. So that's a good one. What's another good design? I think quilting sort of point to point, like some of those arcs that I was showing in the quilts that have a specific grid in their piecing. I think that might be quite doable as well. Early on, I loved feathers. So I started quilting those feathery plume shapes, much like that hibiscus flower. I did a swirl in the middle, and then I did little feathers around it. That was a favorite for me, but that was just my taste and what I liked quilting on my domestic machine. Mary Jo, I'm in Spokane often. Do you ever do in-person demos or classes? I don't very often in my studio, Mary Jo, because I don't have very much space. I do travel. I now am an independent contractor for Bernina, so I travel to different cities and teach in that way, and at trade shows and quilt shows as well. So, Terry, I just made the audition plastic, didn't wipe off the dry erase marker, and it won't come off now. I mean, it depends on what marker you used, but perhaps rubbing alcohol, that would be an idea. I know people who have done it even with cling wrap, cling film. So, I mean, that is certainly an option too, and then it's really disposable. Nikki, I found drawing Zentangle designs gives me muscle memory for designs in free motion quilting, and use dry erase marker over a clear sheet protector to draw the designs for muscle memory. Do you practice this way? Certainly, I have gone to Zentangle coloring books and things like that for ideas and for inspiration. I personally don't find that I'm a doodler. Some quilters are, and some quilters will say, doodle, 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 doodle. That's what, gives you muscle memory. I learned mine from quilting, so I tend to just draw a thing out until I've kind of figured out my thread path, and then I start quilting it. That's my way. But you should absolutely do what's working for you. Sue, if you could provide us with a copy of the workbook all filled out, that would be wonderful. That would be like giving you all the answers, Sue. Roswitha, would you recommend all over waves on a domestic machine? Have a project with swans and love your whale solution. Do you know, I think you could. The tricky thing on a domestic machine, of course, is that you have to pause and reposition your hands or reposition a hoop. So think that through in terms of how big the waves are, or maybe where they cross over each other, right where they're crossing, for example. That would be a good place to stop, reposition your hands, and keep on quilting. So you'll have to kind of think that through.
Okay.
All right, you guys, let's keep going because we've still got some material to cover. Myth number 4. The skill level is beyond me. Here's the thing. Everyone starts at the beginning with no exceptions. So remember I showed you the picture of my first quilt on Lucy? And here's the second picture of it, right? I started at the beginning, looks like a kindergartner for sure, no doubt about that. So everyone starts there at the beginning, so there's no shame in that. There's just know that with each quilt it will get better. With each practice sandwich it will get better. That's the only thing to remember. I want to tell you just a little bit here about my quilting journey, and I'm going to show you a picture here of a fairly recent quilt that I did. This was for a challenge in our local machine quilting guild, and we received the challenge in January, and this particular quilt, you're seeing just a touch of it in the upper right hand corner. I had a number of vintage pieces, not very many of them, and my challenge was to make a whole quilt from them. So I did a kind of contemporary slash of piecing across the quilt. And I had in my mind's eye in January when I got this challenge what I wanted it to look like. I wanted these diagonal stripes of intricate, gorgeous quilting. And I had until October to complete the quilt. And I knew that my control, my precision at the long arm, I wasn't good enough to carry out my vision. So I set about that year reading about how people learn things, not just quilters. How do people learn things? How do musicians, how do artists, how do athletes learn skills and advance their skills quickly? And then I tried to apply that to my quilting. This quilt was where I began to have the idea for the masterclass that I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes. This is when my thoughts kind of gelled. Is there a way that we as quilters can approach this in the same systematic fashion? Start here, add this, add this, add this, learn a lot in a short period of time. This quilt, I did it. I think it's an example of that.
Go back one, they missed number 4, we went over it too fast.
Okay,
so let's see myth number 4.
Okay, there's going to be more of it still. Myth number 4, apparently, Mr. Producer is saying some of you missed myth number 4, the text. Here it is for your workshop. The skill level is beyond me. I don't know how to do that. It's too hard. And so the point I'm making with this iris-colored quilt, and her name is Ava, by the way. I'm still naming things. The point I'm making with Ava is I felt that same way too. In January, I thought I have a vision. I know what I want it to be. I know I don't know how to quilt with that kind of intricacy or precision, but can I learn? Here's a close-up of that quilt as I was working on it, as it's at the long arm. And you can see the picture on the left. Well, the one on the right too. Those quilting designs were quilted, half of them I quilted first and then quilted the mirror image. If you've done very much machine quilting at all, you'll know that's not very easy. It's like quilting with your right hand and quilting with your left hand. That's kind of what it feels like. That's the kind of skill that I was trying to achieve in the process of doing this quilt. And this was me in the trenches learning it. Here's another example, and this quilt was done in that same year. This is a picture taken from a whole round quilt that I call Hootenanny, and it has 8 owls on it. They're kind of like spokes of a wheel or the hands of a clock is how they're arranged, and each owl is different. This is just one. I had seen some pictorial intricate quilting and thought, I want to do that. Can I do that? And so of course I just dive in and try. Whoever of you said that you don't have any fear, that you're fearless, that's me too when it comes to quilting. I'll just try it and figure out as I go. And that's what I did with these owls. I found some diagrams. I kind of sketched in, the shape of their eyes and where their wing was and their body outline. And then I just went to town with needle and thread and quilted them. So this, I want to give you inspiration. This is doable. I made huge strides in my quilting control and precision in that 1 year. So let's keep going. Myth number 4. We all begin at the beginning. The second thing to remember is that focused practice is what really elevates skill rapidly. And I want to just get ahead a little bit to my notes here so that I don't forget any of the things that I want to say with this. Focused practice or deliberate practice is a common term, and it's not one that I coined. Other people have used it. And this is some of the things that I was reading about in that year that I wanted to get to be a better quilter. And the thing is, doing something over and over and over and over again might give you experience, but not necessarily make you better. So think of a golfer. He goes off to the practice range and he swings at 1,000 balls, and he just swings it and just keeps on swinging, keeps on swinging. At the end, he may say, I've done 1,000 balls, I have so much experience, but has he gotten any better? But think about if that same golfer, think about if he breaks it down, or better yet, if he maybe gets a coach and someone watching him who breaks it down into smaller parts, how he stands, how he holds his club, how he swings, how he follows through. And now he starts working on those smaller foundational parts, and when he perfects them or improves them, his golfing game as a whole has started to improve. I found that to be true for quilting too, and I'm going to give you some examples of this too. So let's see, for example, oh, sorry, I went too far.
Okay, we're here, right?
Mr. Producer's following me so well. When I skip ahead, he does too. Let's show you this picture though. This is an example of what I mean when I talk about focused practice as it applies to quilting. So I call this quilting design Waves and Bubbles. Really original, I know. And in reality, those bubbles are about 1.5 to 1.75 inches, which is fair size. But still, when you think of a whole quilt, there's a lot of bubbles across that whole quilt. But here's the thing. When I quilt this design, I don't just churn out bubbles as fast as I can, whatever they may look like. I literally take the time to think about them as I'm quilting them. I take the time to stay in control of my machine. So whether I'm guiding the handlebar or whether I'm guiding the fabric under the needle, I am in control. And slowing down and staying in control of every movement might make you more awkward at first, but in the long run, trust me, it pays off. If you will do a whole quilt that has bubble after bubble after bubble, I promise you, the roundness of your bubbles will improve. If you are conscious of, make that bubble nice and round, make it the same size as the one that went before, make that bubble nice and round, make it the same size, that focused and intentional practice will improve your skill and will do it quite rapidly. So let's have a look at what some other successful learners have to say. Thomas Fuller says that all things are difficult before they are easy. I think this is a great thing to remember as quilters. When I looked at the purple quilt Ava, or when I had the idea for owls, that seemed so far beyond my reach. And let's face it, when you were a toddler, like potty training may have seemed beyond your reach. It was difficult, but repetition and learning how to do it and practicing it, suddenly it's easy. Whoever thinks about that anymore? Whoever thinks about how they write their own name anymore? It became easy. What was once difficult is now easy. Here's another one, John Acuff. This is such wisdom. Don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle, or your middle to someone else's end. And I think I could add to that, don't compare your end to someone else's beginning. It's not a race, right? Your journey is your journey. But look at your quilting today compared to what your quilting was last month or last year or 5 years ago, and celebrate that progress. And this quote, yours truly, no professional athlete was born knowing how to walk. No long arm quilter, no machine quilter was born knowing how to quilt. We were not. This is a learned skill. It's so much like handwriting, the practice sessions. It is a learned skill and everyone can do it. But I have some encouragement for you too. Hang on a second, I went too far. And that's my fault, Dave, sorry about that. The final analysis of this process of it being a journey and it being steps and it being scalable, the end result is you don't need to be stuck in paralysis anymore. You just need to get quilting. You need to celebrate the learning process and the progress that you are making. So I want you to find freedom in that. Myth number 5. You guys need to see this for your little PDF. Myth number 5 is that it needs to look perfect. This is absolutely not true. You want your quilting, in fact, to look handmade. You are not a computer. You don't want it to look like a computer, frankly. You want it to look handmade. However, this is what's encouraging for you. Take a close-up. This is the same Waves and Bubbles quilt that I showed you earlier. This is a close-up of some of the bubbles, and you can see there are several right next to each other that are very imperfect, right? My backtracking, my traveling over the earlier quilting in those bubbles, very not perfect. But let's have a look at the whole quilt. Can you see those imperfect bubbles? They weren't the only two. There were lots of imperfect bubbles on this quilt. That's not the point. The point was I focused on the things that I could control. I focused on keeping the size of them consistent. I focused on making them as round as I could. And the fact that my actual stitching was not perfect absolutely does not show. Absolutely doesn't. So you're aiming in general for consistency when you're quilting freehand. You are not trying to achieve perfection. You're trying to achieve consistency. So this is what that focused practice will help you with. Thinking about those bubbles and getting them round and getting them a consistent size will trick the eye into seeing beautiful, even texture on the quilt. Another little quick tip that I'll drop in here is when you are practicing a new design, I encourage you to choose matching thread to the fabrics that you're stitching on, because then your eye again will read the indentation of the quilting lines and not read the individual stitches. So that can be a way to kind of camouflage a bit. And remember too that an imperfect quilt is equally warm. The lady who was asking, I think it was Marianne, who was asking about a quilt perhaps that you've started and don't like the quilting, what shall I do with it? My advice is just keep on quilting it and give it to someone and it's equally warm. And next year you'll feel more confident about your choices and the designs that you pick for a quilt. And the year after that, even more. You'll keep improving. Don't expect yourself to be perfect now. Don't expect to look back and see perfection in your past, okay? So here we are now. Hang on a second. Let me read my notes. I should ask before we keep going. I'd love for you to be typing into the comments what you have found to be the most useful thing to you in these myths. What myth resonates with you, and have I managed to break any of them for you? Because I feel like at this point we're kind of standing at a crossroads. If you've been dealing with this paralysis, this freezing, this not knowing what to do at quilts, you've kind of got two options today. And option number 1 is that you keep on standing and staring, perhaps even dreading the works in progress that you've got that you want to be quilting on. And option number 2 is that you commit to learning and practicing both the skills and the decision-making processes that help you to finish those quilts and get them into the hands of people who love them. Now, absolutely, you can learn from, YouTube University or quilting alongside your friends. I mean, there is endless knowledge out there. But if you want a proven way to practice, to develop skills, to grow your repertoire of designs, then I would love to be your guide, because I have been there. You've seen some of my pictures. I have faced a lot of these same dilemmas, and I think I can help you get through them. So I want to introduce you to my Freehand Quilting Masterclass. This is, I've subtitled it Fearless skill. Those are the things that I try so hard to focus on. It's a standout program that not only teaches specific quilting designs, and there are just over 30 designs in the class. Someone who was asking earlier, are the whimsical roses? Yes, they're in there. The waves and bubbles are in there. Many of the designs you've seen today are in this masterclass. So it not only dives deep into each of those designs, breaking them down, demonstrating them, showing you how to do them step by step, giving you doodle pages for them, but it also teaches the thought processes that enable you to develop designs of your own. So I've talked a little bit about that today. This idea that you can look at something that you see in wallpaper or carpet or woodwork, whatever it may be, and translate that into a quilting design. That's a thought process, knowing how to make a design that is graceful, that is repeatable, that you can do over and over again, that you can move around a quilt top on. All those thought processes come into play. So there's a heavy emphasis on that. And also on the idea of focused and intentional practice that really elevates your skill and your control at your quilting machine. So all of that is part of the masterclass. So here's kind of how it's broken down. There are 6 modules. Each of them has theory and has quilting. So by theory, I mean I talk about these thought processes or how to practice or the tools that I use in my studio or checklists for ways that you could change up the scale or shape of a design. So there's theory in every lesson, and then there's quilting demos of every design. You do have lifetime access to the whole masterclass. So it begins next Friday, April 22nd with Module 1. And each Friday a new module comes out until you have them all. And then you have lifetime access. And by that I mean you have access for the lifetime of the course. And if I ever retire the course, I will offer you the option of downloading it at that point. Meantime, the reason I've kept it online access is so that I can do updates to it, and I have done that. So for students who have been in it, I've added a design or two, I've added photo albums, I've added doodle pages, so all those updates are always available to you, always. So there's no limit to the access and there's no deadline for attending the classes or for completing them. The modules just open up to you one at a time. So I've mentioned the doodle pages. They're hand-drawn by me, so they show you the quilting path for these designs so that you can trace over and practice and get familiar with the movements. And the photo albums are pictures of the designs used on actual quilts, so you can get some ideas of what fabrics, what it looks like on certain fabrics or what it might be suitable for, and you can see it on real live quilting projects. And also I have a private Facebook group just for students of the masterclass so that we can talk freely about these designs, share pictures, share hang-ups, share challenges, ask for ideas. What shall I quilt on this? All that sort of thing is in the Facebook group. So here is a super quick look at what's in each module, and I will show you at the end where you can go to read this in much more detail. Module 1 talks about the anatomy of a freehand design. So that's the entrance, the exit, the echo stitching, what makes up the freehand design. And then we quilt out a selection of loopy designs. Module 2, we talk about this idea of deliberate practice of foundational quilting shapes. And we talk about tools in the quilting studio. And then we practice quilting a number of skill building shapes. Module 3, we talk about variables that we can introduce into our quilting. They might be size or scale or repeats or echoes, those sorts of things. We talk about where we can find cues for our quilting designs, cues for how to draw out a design or how to move around a quilt top. We talk about thread choices. And then we quilt out a number of designs that include waves or lines. Module 4. More variables. This time they're a little more mechanical, things like stitch regulation or not, that sort of thing. We talk about different ways to baste a quilt, and then we quilt out a number of designs with arcs and curves. Module 5, change-ups. So that's what I call, when you add extra elements or you dress up a design in some way. That's what I call a change-up. So we talk about a number of those. We quilt out florals, paisleys, feathers, flames. There's a lot of designs in Module 5. And we also talk a little bit about using some of these designs as fills if you want to use them in your custom quilting project. So how would you do that? And Module 6 then, I talk about a kind of non-threatening way to audition designs, ways to mark your quilt, ways to determine the size of your quilting and to keep consistent size in your quilting. And then we quilt out a number of row-based designs. So that's all the modules, and this is what you've been waiting for. Here's the recap. So the 6 modules, each one is delivered, 1 each week until you have them all, and then you have them for always. There's no deadline. You don't have to attend a live class. They're all pre-recorded. First one rolls out April 21, and each Friday thereafter till you have all 6. You have lifetime access to those with any updates or improvements, or when I re-record them, any designs I might add, you have those for always. Doodle pages come with them, so these are, you can download them and print them out and slip them in a page protector, and it gives you a way to practice by following my drawn designs. And then photo albums that show you the designs on actual quilts, and private access to the Facebook group for community, for being able to talk about and share about these designs. And that whole masterclass is a one-time purchase of $447. I've added with the masterclass a couple of bonus modules. These are not quilting designs, but they're skills that I thought are really, really helpful for those who are completing actual quilts. So bonus module number 1 is dealing with common quilt top challenges. And this is just a collection of challenges that I have found in my 1,000+ quilts and ways that I resolved them. So it might be dealing with bulky seams, it might be dealing with wonky borders, it might be dealing with the quilt that's narrower at one end than it is at the other. All kinds of challenges that I've listed with steps that you can take to combat them or to make them right. Bonus module number 2 is tension and stitch diagnostics. This can be incredibly frustrating for a machine quilter when you can't get your stitches to form beautifully. So this is just a collection of tips that I've found. Try this one, try this one, try this one, try this one, until you diagnose what the problem is and are able to fix it. So I add to that from time to time because I'm just collecting these tips through my quilting journey as well. And then the third bonus module is applying binding on the long arm. I don't know if you even knew that was a thing, but indeed you can. You just need a very simple straight ruler and you can attach binding to the top of a quilt on the long arm. This can be useful if you quilt for clients and you want to get really good at this so that it's a service you can offer. It might be really useful if perhaps your shoulders are bothered by wrangling a quilt at your domestic machine. Perhaps this is a great solution for you, applying the binding at the long arm. So that's bonus module number 3. Those are all included. Also, I am offering I call it a fast action bonus, for those who sign up today while we're still on air, and it's going to be about 45 minutes from now. The fast action bonus is free access to a monthly membership that I offer. So this membership is similar in that it's my same casual style of quilting, but it offers a bit of a different style. So it tends to have some more custom quilting designs perhaps. I have guest presenters come in. I do quilt along projects. There are new things added into this membership every single month. So I am offering to those of you who choose to purchase the masterclass today, I'm offering you 3 months of enrollment into that membership. They will start as the masterclass finishes in 6 weeks. Those 3 months will start to kick in, and you can be in there for 3 months. You can continue it then if you want, or cancel it at any time. That's entirely up to you. So it's just a nice taste of that for you. All right, let's have a quick look at what a couple of my students have had to say. This is Fran. So worth investing in yourself. This class is worth every penny and then some. The information and hands-on demonstrations are priceless. If you want to freehand your quilt tops, this class will build your confidence. All you have to do is practice. So happy I took this class. I loved Fran's title, So Worth Investing in Yourself. Fran doesn't quilt for a lot of clients. She mostly quilts for herself, but she felt like she was investing in her joy, in her reward as she quilts. And this one is from Erica. Susan's patient and friendly teaching style really sets this class apart from the rest. She finds multiple ways to explain things to her students so that everyone understands the concepts and has some great motifs that I haven't seen in any other classes. I really enjoyed the course and encourage anyone at any long arm skill level to join the Freehand Quilting Masterclass. So you guys, I have a promise. Those of you who enroll in this masterclass, you will emerge from it with no more paralysis. Instead, you will have confidence in your quilting. You will have a much more relaxed approach to the quilts in your lineup, and you will have a huge repertoire of designs to use in your everyday edge-to-edge quilting. It's all about elevating your skill and lowering your shoulder tension. Can we have a scene with just me for a moment? And there's another benefit to this that I don't have in my slideshow, but that I wanted to talk to you about. This is one of the great unseen benefits, I think, of edge-to-edge quilting, and that is within your day-to-day quilting, you can be building your skill set while you work. So in other words, if you want to do custom quilting or heirloom quilting, you don't need to practice that on 40 quilts in order to get good enough to do it. Think, for example, of the quilt that had the waves and bubbles, okay? If you quilt those circles with intention and you get good at making round circles, guess what? You know how to do pebbling as a fill in a quilt. You've mastered that skill. If you master the C shape or the S shape or the crazy 8 or the ribbon candy, any of those shapes that you use in your everyday quilting, you have solidified that skill in your muscle memory, and you can take that into any type of quilting that you try to do in the future. So I think that is just a great benefit of knowing that as I'm working in my day-to-day work, I'm always, always, always advancing my skill while I work. I don't have to load a practice sandwich to learn a new skill. Okay, let's do a recap one more time, and I want to offer another payment option to you just in case this suits you better. So we've got 6 modules, remember, they start next Friday the 21st. A module is released each week. You have lifetime access to those modules. You can watch them as often as you want. There's no deadline, there's no completion deadlines, nothing like that. You can watch them whenever you like. You get advantage of all the updates as they roll out. You will receive doodle pages where you can practice drawing those quilting lines as well, and photo albums that show the designs in use on actual quilts. You will receive access to a private Facebook group with other students, and there are a great bunch of encouraging students in that group. And then, of course, there are the 3 bonuses. Bonus number 1 is dealing with common quilt top challenges. Bonus number 2 is tension and stitch diagnostics. And bonus number 3 is applying binding on the long arm. So there's a choice here. There's a one-time payment of $447, or if it's more comfortable for you, you can do a payment today of $167 and then another payment in 1 month and another payment in 2 months. So those options are both available to you. All right. Here's the easiest way to do it. You can go simply to signup.stitchedbysusan.com. There's a link there for the masterclass. Or if you're familiar with this process, you can use your smartphone camera to capture this little QR code, and that will take you right there. So a couple of things. The page it's going to take you to has a lot of information about the masterclass, much more than I've covered in the last 10 minutes, including a syllabus of all those modules with some detail of what's in them. So you can really get a sense of what designs are included and what material I cover and the scope of the whole thing. In addition, there's a section near the end with frequently asked questions. So feel free to browse over those, and that might answer some of the questions that you have about it. You can also ask some here. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go back on the screen in a moment and take some more questions and answers. We're going to leave this purchasing window up then for a while, probably, like I said, about 45 minutes. That gives you opportunity. If you need to email me with any questions, you can do that, and gives you opportunity, if you wish, to take advantage of that fast action purchase today. The enrollment does remain open right through the 18th of April, so there is time. If you don't want to make that decision today, that's fine too, but the fast action bonus is just for today. So let's go to just me for a moment. Get your questions in if you haven't already, and I'll add one more thing too. For the entire month of April, I'm actually coming onto my YouTube channel every day with a little live segment. Topics change. You guys have been great to email me and message me various topics that I'm trying to address. So each day I'm coming on and talking about things relating to machine quilting. Sometimes the long arm, sometimes it can be thread. Tomorrow I'm tentatively planning to talk about my DIY batting storage system that my husband built for me, and I'll show you that and give you some examples of that and how you might use it. So each day there's something different. So I encourage you to pop in for those. Watch on the YouTube channel, subscribe, and click on the bell so that you get notifications when I'm coming live if you want to see those. So take advantage of all that stuff. I do love sharing the things that I've learned, and that's one way to do it. Okay, let's have some questions. Here we go.
I want you to answer this
Mr. Producer is beginning at the end. What a guy.
Yes.
Okay,
This is pretty important.
I'm not a Facebook fan. Are there other ways to access community? I mean, one of the best ones would be the YouTube channel because I'm on there quite a lot as well. So for example, I live stream a quilting project from beginning to end about twice a month. That goes out on both YouTube and Facebook. You can pick your favorite place and they're interactive. So that would be my best suggestion.
Q&As or Zoom.
Certainly signing up for my newsletter will help in some respects. You'll get a feel for what I'm doing, and sometimes I give connections there to, for example, Instagram Reels or links like that. Do you do any kind of social media? But YouTube is probably the second best place for that. Susie is asking, where do we find the free feather class? Again, look in any of my past YouTube live and unscripted is what I usually call them. Look in any of those longer episodes, and in the show notes at the bottom, lots of them have it, that link directly to the feather class. I didn't think of bringing that one to type into the chat today. Okay, Kim, any tips for purchasing a used long arm? That's a great question, Kim. I do think purchasing a used one is a great way to start until you know what style of quilting you like and what features that a long arm might have. But what are my tips? I know there are some Facebook groups that are dedicated toward buying and selling long arm equipment or sewing studio equipment. There are also a couple of websites. Long Arm University is one of them. Accomplished Quilting is another that I can think of offhand that take trade-ins, and so then they often have used ones available. And from there, my best advice is go to quilt shows or quilt shops and give them a test drive and find out what feels right for you.
Short answers, we have a lot of questions.
Okay, my husband is saying short answers, there are a lot of questions. April Story, my swirls look like they are squares. Any suggestions? It really is a matter of control. Mess with your speed. Try slowing them down and seeing if you can get better control. Try speeding them up and see if you get better control, and work with that and see if that helps. Teresa, when you're quilting something like the lavender quilt, what are you thinking as you quilt? Oh gosh, that's a deep question. I'll tell you this, I do love listening to podcasts and I love listening to Audible books while I quilt. Is that what I'm thinking of? I don't know, but it's enough of a sideline that I can be focused on what I'm quilting and still listen to the story. Chris, marking your quilt. I feel very nervous about marking a client quilt. Any suggestions? I have had good success with both the purple air erase markers and the blue water erase markers. I have used them fairly freely. I do suggest being able to rinse them out of the quilt. So for my purple Ava quilt that had a lot of marking that I showed in the pictures, I actually submerged and rinsed that quilt because it had a lot of marking and I want to get the chemicals out. I've never had trouble with that. Lily, if I sign up for the masterclass, will I be taught the skills to make something like this? Do you mean the one that is behind me?
The ones you were working on, the owl and
Oh,
Ava.
you're referring to the owl and Ava. Well, I don't give you lessons for specific quilts like that, but lessons on developing that kind of control of your quilting, absolutely. Kimberly, can you pay for the masterclass in monthly payments? I answered that at the end. Yes, absolutely. How tall is the owl? Oh, the owl was probably about 8 to 9 inches tall. Kathy, how do you get your bubbles so perfect? Well, do you notice, Kathy, I showed the picture of how imperfect some of them in fact are. But beyond that, it is that intentional practice. I'm thinking about those circles as I make them. I'm thinking about roundness and thinking about consistency. Is the masterclass for domestic machines or just long arm? I have a number of students in it, actually, who do work at their domestic machines. Many of the designs translate, just sometimes have to be scaled down a little bit into working on a domestic machine. Alicia, what can I use to practice on that is economical instead of $7 a yard or more fabric? Great question. I recommend connecting with your local quilting guild and seeing if they have some kind of charitable organization, because there, in my city anyway, and in lots of others, there are dozens and hundreds of quilts that just need quilting, and they're just happy to get them done, and it's a great way to practice, and they're small too. Perfect. Elsie, what is the timeline for the masterclass? First module rolls out next Friday, April 21st, and each week thereafter for 6 weeks. You do not have to attend a class. You can listen to them whenever you want to, but that's when the module opens up for you. Is the live available to watch later? I couldn't follow well. Yes, it is. You can actually come back to the same YouTube link, but I will be sending an email out this afternoon with the link in it too. You can watch it over again for about a week. It'll be up. Deborah, what kind of fabric marker do you use? I'm concerned about staining or returning of the color or shadows. I think I addressed that one. The purple air erase, the blue water erase. I'm not particular about brand names. I just think it's wise to rinse them out when you're done.
How long is the replay available?
The replay is available for about a week. Today is Saturday, so we'll keep it up through next Saturday.
I answered this, but I'd answer it again.
Okay, do you need to attend the masterclass in real time? Work schedules don't always allow attendance. No, the actual lessons are pre-recorded. So you can watch them at your leisure. They will just open up and be available to you on Friday morning. There will also, and I didn't mention this, but I always schedule, usually weekly, live question and answer sessions as a kind of bonus material and a chance for you to connect with me and to talk about them. They're on Zoom, and I'll be issuing a schedule for those. So those would be live attendance, but I also record them so you can come back to them later. So you have this opportunity to email questions to me first. I can answer them in the Zoom call. You can come back and watch it later. So there's multiple opportunities to get feedback, but you do not need to attend any of the sessions live. Is the masterclass in US dollars or Canadian? It is US dollars because that is where I live just now. Does the same cost apply to international customers? Yes, in US dollars. There's no, as far as I know, there's no shipping, obviously, because it's digital. I'm not aware of any additional taxes or fees. When is the deadline to sign up? April 18th. The evening of April 18th is when the enrollment doors will close to give me time to finalize the emails and the enrollment before the first class goes out on the 21st. Dorothy, do you have a Discord? Great question. I don't currently. Mr. Producer's telling me we're going to talk about that, so that may change.
I'm just adding this one because I can.
Thanks once again for your patient teaching, and thanks to Dave for the behind-the-scenes work. Yes, indeed. I appreciate that for sure. Chris, what would the cost of the masterclass be living in Australia? I honestly do not know the conversion rate off the top of my head, Chris. It is the price I listed was in US dollars, though. So hopefully that helps.
Keep asking us, so keep answering.
Yeah, more people are asking, can we view the workshop again? Absolutely, you can. It's the same YouTube link. We'll bring you back to it. I will also send an email today with the link, and it will be up for a week. You can watch it as many times as you want. Nancy P, for 447, we get the masterclass, correct?
And advanced.
Oh, and advanced, she's asking. Okay, let me clarify that again. So advance is the name of the membership. As a subscription membership, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it today, but the regular price on it is $19.97 a month. So for those who purchase the masterclass right now while we're on air, I'm offering you 3 months of that membership, so about a $60 value as the masterclass finishes. So you'll be able to get in it and explore all the content that is in there and see what I add each month and then decide if you want to continue or not. So the 447 purchases the entire masterclass for you. And if you purchase today, it gets you 3 months of the advance membership as well. Karen, when doing a bubble and wave, do I stitch a plain wave first and then do the bubbly wave? That's how I do it, because that initial plain wave establishes kind of my rhythm and placement. You might choose to space your waves and bubbles differently. That's entirely up to you. Kim, is the masterclass for domestic machines? I think we had this exact same question. So yes, I do have students that work on domestic machines or sit-down long arms, and it works well. Some of them are in the Facebook group and very active, and it's a great resource for you to ask questions of, but most of the designs do convert well. I did learn to quilt on a domestic, and so I'm familiar with that process. One of these days, I'd like to re-record the masterclass actually and demo on both types of machines, but so far the demos are on the long arm. Kathy, will you be offering this again? I travel all summer. Yes, Kathy. At this point, I'm planning to offer it again in November. That's always subject to family and life, but that is my current plan. Okay, that's about it for questions. So folks, we're going to go. Did you put, can you put an email address across the screen?
Oh yes, I'll do that.
Okay, Mr. Producer is going to try and put my email address across the screen. So basically, here's the thing. If you have questions about the content or about how it's delivered, please go and check out the link to the masterclass. There's a ton of information there and a ton of frequently asked questions. If you don't find your answers there and you still have questions, email me, info@stitchedbysusan.com. Can you put it at the top and it'll show up on the white maybe?
I'm trying to edit it.
Mr. Producer, like on the fly, he's adding this to the screen so you guys can see it. Anyway, it's info@stitchedbysusan.com. You can email me your questions, and we'll give this about 45 minutes from the time I actually stop talking until we turn this YouTube session off, that you can ask questions if you need them, get feedback if you need them, and that's how long the special bonus offer to the advanced membership will be available. Okay. I just signed up for the masterclass. Sounds like we also get advanced for 3 months as well. Do I have to do anything else to get this?
End of 6 weeks.
You do not have to do anything else. I will be, tracking all the people that purchase until we close down this YouTube episode. So I'll have that information, and I will be giving you that access as the masterclass lessons when we get to Module 6. So I'll keep you informed about that, but you don't have to do anything else. That's the answer to your question.
I think that's it.
A few of you are saying, I've just signed up. I'm so excited. I don't have a way to really look at that as it's happening to say, oh, yay, Joe is here, and yay, Mary is here. But let me tell you, Dave and I, we're a small business, and we literally go and read these emails and comments afterwards, and we literally cheer every time someone signs up. It lights me up to see you kind of get your wings and start to fly with your free motion quilting. It really does. Lots of thank yous. I appreciate that. I'm getting hoarse, so it's definitely time to stop talking and to get my fancy microphone off with my little lapel pin. It's like a little boutonniere, isn't it, with a little corsage pin. Thank you all so much for coming. It's a pleasure to spend fun quilty time with you. As we go, I will put up the informational screen again. Kathy is asking, I signed up yesterday. How do I access the Facebook group? I believe, Kathy, I saw your name this morning and I gave you admittance this morning, but I will double check. It does take me a little time, by the way. You have to request to join the Facebook group. I have to go and double check that you did in fact sign up and etc. So it takes me a few hours and maybe even a day to get that done, but I try and be really on the ball with that. Okay. So thank you all for being here. It has been my pleasure indeed to spend this hour and a bit with you. We will put the informational links up again if we could do that, Mr. Producer, and I will see you next time, really tomorrow. If you want to check in again, I'll be live with some quilty tidbits. So thanks again for joining me. Have a great rest of the day.